Welcome to Open Container. I'm Doug Schnitzbahn. I'm a journalist, writer, and overall lover of the outdoors. I've fought wildfires, reported on national politics, published magazines, and I have slathered myself in the mud of Sicilian volcanoes. On this podcast, we're going to have an open conversation about culture, conservation, policy, business, issues that matter the most to the outdoor community. Let's get some. A cancer diagnosis does not come as quickly as you may think. There are far too many tests. There's far too much worry in between the time when you feel the first symptom and you finally get that dreaded diagnosis. I went through this experience last year and am continuing to go through treatment for lymphoma months later. I am still fighting and waiting for new diagnoses. It is a difficult journey, but as many will tell you, it's one that opens your eyes. On the September day before I was going in for a surgical biopsy for a lump on my neck, after months of not knowing if what I had was benign or deadly, there was a light rain in the morning and sun in the afternoon. I lay in a hammock in my yard and watched the birds. There was a gang of ravens, birds whom I've been told it's possible for humans to learn to communicate with, to literally talk to. They remember every good deed. When my father passed away from cancer just a few months before my diagnosis, someone told me to listen to the signs in nature, to listen to the birds, that his voice would be there. My son, very notably, is an accomplished birder. Ever since he was young, he began cataloging the birds he sees, and now he has a life list bigger than that of most people who have spent a lifetime birding. I love to go out and watch them with him. Not for the same reason, however. He loves the life list. He wants to expand the catalog of what he has observed, to see the wide range of life that's out there in the skies and the branches. Me, I like more of a broad picture. I like to know how the birds relate to where they are, how they fit into an ecosystem. I'm not as concerned about the list. Of course, my son's interest in birds goes far deeper than the list. He wants to understand the way they move within the seasons, the way they understand the world in a way that we are blind to. And he loves to learn their songs. He identifies them even when he can't see them. And he is going to work to save some space on this earth for birds and people to continue being together. Back to the day before the surgery. Laying in the hammock, I saw a strange bird that I've never seen before. It landed on the fence and looked me up and down. It had all the markings of a flicker, but something was different, much different. I stood there with it for a moment, and then I got my son to identify it. He told me it was a leucistic flicker, a very rare version, perhaps completely unique. Was it a sign? I wasn't sure. What I did know was that it was a moment of singular beauty, of looking into the world and seeing something new and different and rare. I said having cancer makes you rethink things, see them differently. When I was going through chemotherapy, my brother came to sit with me for a treatment. In the cancer center room, where an IV dripped healing poison into me for 7 or 8 hours, I looked out the window to the mountains. I just wanted to be up there. So after treatment, we drove out to a spot off Flagstaff Road in the Flatirons, where you can stand on bare rock and look at the snow-capped Indian peaks stretching all along the horizon, with a giant gulf of emptiness below you. All it took for me to appreciate life, the moment, was being here and breathing. Our planet can heal us. Our planet is also ill. Cancer is a funny thing, really. All it is cells that won't die. They want to live. They want to survive. So it is, I guess, that we as a species want to survive as we destroy the place that nurtures us. This is a very easy and simple metaphor, of course. But it's true. If we understand the ways we can fight cancer in our own bodies, I do think maybe we can understand a better way of looking at our place in the world. This planet is too beautiful to die, and I've seen the sickness far too often. I miss the incredible gnarled and solemn white bark pines that used to crown the gravelly range and its meadows of wildflowers. now gone due to climate change. I've skied the Vallée Blanche Glacier in Chamonix and seen how it is receding so far back that stairs need to be built down to reach the spot where you leave the glacier to catch a train back into town. There's an incredible sadness to all those now exposed cliffs. And yet, I have also seen the world heal. I have seen lodgepole pines growing back out of clear cuts in Island Park, Idaho. Seen the waters around New Jersey's Sandy Hook, where I grew up, that were vilely polluted when I was a child, getting cleaner, bringing in dolphins and some of the once diverse wildlife that used to fill this now urban place. That's all to say, healing is possible, but it takes work. It takes acknowledgement. It takes effort, and sometimes it takes seeing a sign, like a leucistic flicker, and knowing that this rare beauty is in our hands. My guest today has fought cancer and has seen the far reaches of the planet and how they've been affected by climate change. Eric Larsen has spent the past 25 years traveling in some of the most remote and extreme environments on the planet. To date, Eric has completed more North and South Pole expeditions than any other American in history, including the first ever summer expedition to the North Pole, as well as a world record expedition to the South Pole, North Pole, and top of Mount Everest, all within a 365-day period. Eric regularly leads last degree expeditions to both the North and South Poles, as well as a month-long Greenland ice cap traverse. In January 2021, Eric was diagnosed with stage 3B colorectal cancer, and after a difficult 2-year battle is currently NED, no evidence of disease. He is writing a book detailing his cancer expedition. Now let's open the container with Eric Larsen. Okay, here I am with a friend, a legend, and a fellow fighter on the battle against a shitty disease. Eric, it's really good to have you here.
It's great to be here. How are you doing, Doug?
I'm okay. And let's get into some deep stuff right away. I wanted to ask you, what is the most frightened you've ever felt out in the wild with all the things you've done?
That's an interesting question. First of all, I know you said okay, and that's a really nuanced answer, and it's an easy one to say when things aren't always okay, and they're always not okay. But jumping into it, following your lead, I think I wouldn't say I'm a nervous guy overall, um, but I am always a little kind of like wary of things. I think probably one of the most nervous I've been was probably around 20 years ago when we were doing our first North Pole expedition, and there was just so much uncertainty surrounding the trip, and we were having all these close encounters with polar bears, and we were just going into unknown terrain and these conditions that were just constantly changing. And it's really hard to put in context in today's time because we have so much information about the world and adventure and all these things. But back then, we were doing a summer expedition to the North Pole, and we didn't have people that we could talk to and say, "Hey, what were the conditions are like? What gear should we use? What techniques should we do?" And so we were just traveling in this really unknown way towards an uncertain outcome. And I had gotten sick in Russia, just some bad flu. And I remember just kind of skiing along and just crying and just being like, man, I am never getting out of this place. Like, I am done. And just kind of feeling very overwhelmed and yeah, just scared. So I've been in a lot of other scary situations since then, and in all sorts of different places and styles, but it just in a different way.
But you experienced that kind of that Arctic loneliness, right? Of being on your own and no one out there with you.
That's my whole goal. I mean, that's the whole pursuit of my life, is to find the places where few, if any, people have traveled. And so, and that's where honestly I'm most comfortable. We joke about this all the time at my house. My wife, who's an extrovert, always has this joke with me. And sometimes it's easier for me being on a polar expedition in the middle of nowhere for a couple months than it is going to a party with a bunch of people that I don't know. I'm unfortunately pretty awkward in those situations. So, it's again, these questions I love, but I have a hard time answering in just the 3 word answer because there's so much nuance to all this stuff for me, especially as someone who has thought about this and pursued this path for so long. But the loneliness at times is very difficult. I've dealt with so many different situations. In one hand, it's easier to be on your own and just worrying about yourself. In the other hand, other times I've been in situations where it's really beneficial to have, my family back home supporting me,
Right.
and vice versa. And that changes over a couple month expedition as well. And so it's just, my life, my expeditions are just a roller coaster of emotions and physical hardships and uncertainty. And, at one sense, it seems totally arbitrary as well. I stopped asking myself the question of why a long time ago, but I think it's a normal question to want to ask.
Well, one thing I find interesting from what you said is, in the past 20 years, even the world's gotten closer, right? It's gotten less remote, harder to find those places.
Yeah, it's so different. It's so different. And you don't notice it on any given day when you're just moving along. We're all in the same world. We're super connected. But when you kind of stop, and for me, I have these specific adventures that happened in certain decades and years. And they're a real good yardstick to measure some of that change. And, one of the things is just the technology that we use to navigate. GPS was kind of just coming online in the late 90s. The satellite technology was pretty antiquated as well in terms of communication. We had something that was called a BGAN, and you could just program like 14 messages. And so you turn it on and turn a dial to like number one. And one would be like all okay. 13 is like there's a polar bear eating my leg. Come get us. And that's just one aspect of those trips, the amount of information that exists in so many different ways, from equipment, from the community that's involved in these different pursuits, and how you're able to connect with people, just the casual kind of knowledge that you can gain off of social media. And so I jokingly, when I guide, I call myself like a World War One vet, because when I started doing adventures, it was just for the sake of doing adventures. Nobody was watching me. Nobody was sponsoring me. I was just curious about the world around me, and I wanted to be outside and have cool experiences. And so it was a very old school compared to now. And, it's still an adventure. It's still the same, but it's when you kind of stop and look back, you see the changes pretty distinctly.
So to look at it from the other side, we talked about, the frightening moments, the scary parts of those. I mean, what have been the moments of greatest joy for you being out there?
I'm still trying to figure out what those are. So if you have any suggestions, let me know. I mean, I call a lot of my trips long, freezing cold sufferfests, and that's pretty much what they are. And the joy for me, I mean, I love being out in these places where few people are. I mean, that I love wilderness. I love feeling like a small person in a big place. As crazy as it sounds, I love feeling insignificant. And then I think, it's like a lot of other people who are kind of pushing kind of the limits of adventure. It's a lot in the planning and preparation, and for me, my joy comes in the discipline of it, of being able to make all the right moves. I call it like a chess game, and so I have to be, on an expedition that's 2 months. I have to be disciplined with everything that I do the same thing in the same ways for days and weeks and months. And then when I get to that point, like 50 days in or whatever, and I have the ability to keep going, that's very empowering. Until that time, and actually during and after, it totally sucks.
And it's very different than a mountain expedition, right? Where you're dealing with a lot of monotony, right? Day after day when you're doing a polar expedition.
Yeah, I mean, very quickly, I say you come up against yourself, and so you can be a big asset to yourself, or you can be your own worst enemy. And so you see all of your mistakes get paraded right in front of you. All these things can have a really big impact on your physical ability to move. And time is not necessarily your friend. Just skiing for hours and days, basically looking at nothing, is mind numbing on a good day. And it's a challenge. It's a really hard challenge. I still have like nightmares that I'm in Antarctica and I'm in a whiteout, and that's like one of my least favorite things.
Yeah, I can't imagine the mental capacity it takes to deal with that day after day, to kind of be in a constant vertigo, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think, yes, it's hard to imagine. It's so different. I would say, as an alpine skier, I'm sure you've been on the mountain where you've gotten
Yeah.
caught in a whiteout, and, it's very hard to see it, and that's very similar. Usually you have some sort of reference, or it comes in and out, and it doesn't last forever. So you have a little bit. And I would say, as you know, with all the other things in life, people have an incredible ability to overcome obstacles, and you can be in a situation and find a way. For me, I always call myself the weakest link in everything I do. And so what I just try to do is put myself in a situation where I don't have a choice but to be successful. And back in the day, that was like, hey, we would do an expedition where we couldn't get rescued. Like there was a month of a trip where we couldn't get picked up. There was no helicopter or plane that could reach us. And, when I was younger, that's what I wanted. I wanted the hardest thing possible.
Do you think there are places left on the planet that we can still explore, that are still untouched by people, that are, or have we lost the whole ability to even be, the kind of explorers we think of in the classical sense anymore?
That's a really good question, and something I think about a lot. I call myself a polar adventurer, not a polar explorer, just for the reason of the fact that, we have mapped the whole world. There's satellite images of pretty much everything. And so I think in that historical sense, there is no place left to go. But there are all these unique ways to string together adventures in different styles, um, in different sports, in different timelines. I think just the simple act of going into a place as an individual and experiencing it for yourself is exploration. And I'm a huge believer in that. And just any kind of wilderness or outdoor travel, I think, is important. So I hesitate to say that no, we can explore in the truest sense of the words. I would agree with that statement. That being said, I think exploration is inherent to us as human beings, and being in nature is also an important part of us as human beings. And so, putting those things together, I still think has some value. And there's still this kind of leading edge of human adventure that exists right now, and you have some of this with the FKTs. Clearly, in mountaineering and skiing, there's still first descents and first descents. There's some of these big crossings that still exist in different seasons, and I still believe in those types of challenges, even if they are more kind of on the record side of things and a little more gimmicky. Sometimes you just need an excuse to be able to do something that's interesting to you and provide a challenge. I mean, a marathon is just an arbitrary distance, and we launch into that, or people launch into that challenge all the time, and see a great sense of accomplishment for that. And so I would agree that there are still a lot of adventures yet to be had out there.
But it must have been wild, right, to be these people who were going to spaces where there was no map, no GPS, no idea of what was there. It's hard for us. We've lost it, right?
We have lost it, and again, that's where I think I came into, kind of professional adventuring right at the start of kind of the more modern era of adventure, kind of at the end of exploration, true exploration. And so I touched a little bit of
Right.
that, and of course grew up on all the stories. But yeah, it is so hard. It's that uncertainty, it's that unknown, it's the planning, it's time. I mean, you look at dedicating 3 or 4 years of your life on this one particular task and environment, and the scale of the earth when you're traveling like that. Um, it is hard to comprehend, and we're in it. This is almost like a mantra that I say to myself every morning when I wake up. It's not the past, it's the present. Um, but I still look at those adventures and find inspiration from them, information about how I can conduct my own adventures in terms of, you know, even something as simple, not just the gear, because the gear has obviously changed, but it's somewhat similar. But the team dynamics, leadership, how they operated, how they organized everything. So it's interesting. I still think there is value in those, and I love looking back at them. I may be a bit of a dinosaur in that space overall, but I'm okay with that.
Yeah, I mean, you look at you look at you're saying like leadership, look at the Shackleton expedition, for example, right? Yeah. Like there's a lot we can learn from how they were able to manage and survive that doesn't apply, I guess, to being off the map, right? But can apply to running a good office maybe or something.
Yeah, I mean it's a cheesy corporate speech, but it's true. We live in a society that's full of cushions and guardrails, and the role of risk and challenge, both physical and mental, are less and less a part of what we do. And as a result, I think we do have some challenges to our society. And so understanding that these things have value, that there's some of these concepts that translate to our normal lives that we can emulate in some way on a smaller scale, some of these things, I think can help us quite effectively in today's age. And my son, he's 12, he's in sixth grade. They're reading Shackleton right
Oh,
now,
that's great.
and yeah, it's awesome. And I had to find out from one of his friends. I was like, and we've read it together, and we're reading another book too. So we read all this stuff, and but I messaged his teacher today, and I was like, hey, no pressure, but I would love to come in and do a Q&A or talk or compare and contrast, or open-ended type of a thing, just for the things that we're talking about. Is there are a lot of these things that we can learn from history, obviously, and very specifically these types of adventures that occurred before us.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a book everyone should read. I think it's one of the greatest stories ever ever told. Really, a book that everyone should read. The book, of course, is
Yeah.
Endurance, about the Shackleton expedition.
Yeah, and the crazy thing is, though, there are about 30 other incredible stories of polar survival that don't get as much coverage, that are equally, if not more, epic, which is
Right.
crazy. And so I find all those as a source of inspiration. But Shackleton, what a great story! What an amazing guy! And again, just kind of comparing him to some of these other kind of polar people in my personal career, I've taken a lot from that.
Are there some people, current day explorers that you really look up to, that you've learned from, that have kind of passed the torch to you as well?
Yeah, I mean, I feel so lucky to be friends with a lot of my mentors. It's crazy. Like, when I was a kid, reading these books when I was in sixth, seventh, and eighth grade, I could have, and just being like, oh man, I would love to do this. I could have never imagined that I would meet some of those people that were my own, that I looked up to. And I had a lot of mentors that helped me out along the way too. Of the kind of existing polar adventurers that are alive now, Will Steger, who is an American who lives in Minnesota, is a friend of mine. Paul Shirky, um, There's a Canadian, Richard Weber, who I know, some Norwegians, Berge Ausland, Rune Galnes, that are that were kind of like 10 years ahead of me in my time, maybe 50, a little bit, and real pioneers of the sport and done some of the hardest expeditions in history. um, I could message those guys right now and be like, hey, how's it going? It's so cool. And I studied their books too. I studied what they did. And I'm pretty excited. I'm heading to Europe this summer with my family. I'm going to meet Reinhold
Oh,
Messner,
wow.
which I'm very excited about. I mean, talk about a pioneer. I mean, people, when he climbed Everest, people didn't think without oxygen, people didn't think you could survive without oxygen at that altitude. So, I mean, the amount of question marks that exist in all those people's lives, and they still move forward towards that goal, is incredible.
One of the great things I think about Reinhold too, and probably you've seen this in a lot of your other mentors, is also that, I mean, the importance he put on ethics, of doing it without oxygen, of, saying that some peaks were sacred, like Mount Kailash, and they shouldn't be climbed. That there's also this responsibility, and we need to have good ethics when we're trying things no human has done before, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the ethics are definitely part of it. It's definitely a more modern take, because we're, at a certain point, it was just about survival or figuring out the world around us. That being said, I think the ethics are even more important now than ever. The ethics, the rules, the aesthetic, as we, just like there's a rule in a marathon or a 100-meter dash or a football game, we need to be in these places where we can protect ourselves from ourselves, and therefore, I think, like what you mentioned with Reinhold, those ethics and that style is even more important today than ever.
Absolutely. Now, to get on to mentoring as well, you're also engaged in a lot of guiding and mentoring. Can you tell us about the how do you guide people? What do you teach them? What goes on there?
Yeah, it's interesting. I started out way back in the day doing some whitewater guiding, and I was a dog musher guide, and it was great because I got to go to a lot of places that I never did. But I really felt, especially with the whitewater, and there's a place for everything. But I was just like basically cooking fancy food and washing dishes every day. And I don't have anything against that. But I feel so connected to nature. I think, again, they're coming back to this theme that I'll just kind of bore you to death with, is this value and adventure and being outside. I just really believe in those down through my core, and you don't have to hit people over the head with it, but I want to be in situations where we can enjoy these things and grow and learn and challenge ourselves. And so I kind of shifted more towards education after getting pretty burned out on guiding. I'm like, I'm never going to guide again. But I did in 2008 guide a trip to the South Pole, and that really changed my perspective because it was a long enough trip where, I wasn't just the chief cook and bottle washer. We had to really function as a team. I had to really focus a lot more on the team dynamics and the motivation, as well as just the logistics and everything. And that changed my perspective in a really meaningful way, and maybe not a popular way in terms of like where the money's at, but it's more on this kind of self-supported expedition style travel where it's very skills and philosophical based. I always say it's not only about the what we're doing, but also the why and the how, and kind of leaving some room open for different styles, and kind of providing a framework for people to understand this style of travel in these extreme environments, self-supported. We don't have Sherpas. We're setting up our own tents. I cook one thing and I cook it really well, and that's melted snow. And I and I only cook it for me, and my clients do all their stuff, and it takes a lot of work to get them ready to be in this extreme environment, but my trips actually get easier over time. Like, I do this week training course, and we spend 3 days in a cabin in northern Minnesota, and it's kind of practicing these things, going out, coming back, and then we do a little mini expedition. And it's so challenging the first few days of getting all this stuff going, and it's usually 20, 30 below or more with the wind chill. And then we head out on the ice, and by the last day, I'm just kind of skiing in the back, taking pictures, and it's amazing. And so it takes a lot of work to do those types of trips. It takes a lot of mental focus and knowledge, not just information. But for me, the rewards are greater because I'm able to share my knowledge, and I'm also able to encourage those people to do their own adventures and say, "Hey, here's what I know right now." And you could take what I do and my ego would say just do this and don't do anything else and ski to the North Pole and be 100% safe and set a record or whatever. But everybody's different. They have different styles, different goals, different objectives, and so that's a template that you can analyze your next goal and what your objectives are, and then modify it as you need to. And I really enjoy that. And a lot of my clients I just kind of keep in touch with. We talk all the time, and they've got some adventure, or they'll message me. And not everybody, but it's pretty fun for me, and it's interesting too, in this pursuit that I was like, man, I am never going to guide again. I'm done with it. To something that I really enjoy. I don't do it all year around, which makes it a little easier. I could have all sorts of trips all over the world, but I have a few little things that I do, and I don't really advertise, and it's a lot of fun for me, and I think it's a valuable experience. It's definitely, if you look at like the Seven Summits scene, where people are showing up and they have a bed with a mattress, it's different to
Right.
that. It's the polar opposite, quite honestly. And again, there's not as much money in it, but I think, and this is where I sound like the old World War I guy. There's value in it, and there's value in that process. And um, I got to shut up because otherwise people will just start tuning out because I'm like, okay, I'm the old curmudgeon guy.
No, I don't think so. But you also guide trips gravel biking, and you do stuff closer to home, or
I have like crazy ideas every 2 seconds. And yeah, I do. I love biking. I mean, I think I said this to you. I call myself the world's most boring person because when I was like 5 or fifth grade or sixth grade, I fell in love with biking, and I'd always camped, and now, however many years later, I'm not going to say, I just was biking before we talked right now. And my son and I were talking about setting a tent up in our yard just to camp out during the school week.
nice.
So, there are a lot of opportunities. What I'm trying to do is stay away from, and it's a challenge because I'm a business, I run a
Right.
business. And so the money is in more luxury and more
Right.
service, and I like that. And I'm a huge fan of people getting outside in any capacity, but it's just I know from a guiding perspective, you're more of a servant. Then it's more of a service industry than an educational thing, and so that's where I have to be really careful because I run a business and I want to make money, and I need to make money to support my family. But I also have these ideals and these values that I try to keep in. And then I generally do the opposite thing every once in a while too.
So what's harder, climbing Everest or raising kids?
Well, climbing Everest isn't that hard overall, in my opinion. And raising kids isn't that crazy
Oh, good.
either. But it's a challenge. You're just in it. It's commitment, and I love both. But I do love being a dad as someone who I had a whole crazy life. I don't know what year we first met, but I
Long time.
remember the good old days of OR back in the day when I was in my 30s, and the mid 2000s, and OR was amazing. And I don't know if I ever slept
Right.
during those 4 days. So I was older when I came into being a dad, and I love it. It's amazing. It's a lot like guiding. It's a lot like a polar expedition, a long, maybe not so cold all the time, but it's a suffer fest. The joys are maybe at the end when it's all said and done. And I think it ties along with my guiding philosophy. I love watching these kids find their own groove and become their own persons. And I tell my kids, like, my job is for you to not need me. If there's one thing I learned in polar expeditions, as well as cancer, the world goes on without you. Like, you're the most
Yeah.
important character just to you. And that's a real hard concept to grasp. or it's not hard to grasp, but it's frightening. And I think, luckily or unluckily enough for me on expeditions, I've spent literally years of my life, I've in a tent on expeditions. I mean, a couple years just in the Arctic and Antarctic alone. And you very quickly see how you're just not a part of the story anymore. And that's not anything bad. And you get a message or whatever, or a phone call. But, there's 8 billion other people out there now that are involved in their own stories. So a little bit of a tangent on the parenting thing, but it's great, and I love being a dad. And I'm maybe a little bit more on I just love the process of making the dinner and doing all those other things. I don't know. I've never hated it, but I do have the philosophy is if you do something that you hate long enough, you learn to love it. And so it's a gift for me to be a dad, I feel like. So.
And how do you teach with all the experience you've had being out there? How are you teaching your kids to interact with the natural world?
Old school. I'm old school. Just kick them out the door and lock it behind them. I'm not that old school, but I'm close, because I do see value in this unstructured stuff, and my kids do all the sports and
right.
blah blah blah, and so it's not like my TV is running off of vacuum tubes or anything, but I love camping with the kids so much because it provides this unstructured space. And so when they were smaller, I mean, we still do a ton of car camping now, but we just did a lot of car camping, and they would just go run off. I mean, just last summer, we'll drive up the road just for an overnight. It's just like 2 miles up the road here in Crested Butte. And we were with some friends, and my son was with the buddies, and they just ran off and they were gone. And about an hour later, they came back and they're like, "Oh, sorry it took so long. We got lost." And I was just like, "Good." so I tell my son, because he's a little older, and I'm just like, good judgment comes from bad judgment.
Oh, I like that.
And just, yeah. And so it's trying to just have him take risks in logical steps that don't, overwhelm him. I don't want to push my values on him. I want him to discover his own. That being said, I'm pretty idealistic in a lot of the things I think. So it's a definite challenge, but I'm not trying to live my unrealized sports dreams or even expedition dreams through my kids, which is challenging because my son wants to do my polar training course. And I'm like, I just tell him, I'm like, dude, it's so boring. He's an incredible alpine skier because he's grown up in Crested Butte. So I grew up in Wisconsin. I can't even look down the stuff that he skis. And so he's doing these big jumps and blah, blah, blah. He skis, he takes the bus up, he skis on his own, all this crap. And it's awesome, but he still wants to do this. And I know I could get him ready to ski to the South Pole in a couple years. He would be capable of it. And I could be like, I'll get the sponsors, we'll get this together. But then I'm a tiger polar dad or whatever it is, And so it's a delicate balance with all this stuff.
Sure. Yeah.
I'm trying to just provide him opportunities. We'll build a Quincy and sleep in our front yard. Same with my daughter. We'll go out backpacking, all these things. And I think at the end of the day, these activities are great lifelong pursuits in whatever capacity that it ends up being in for both of my kids.
There's always a downhill after an uphill, right? Well, speaking of the downhills, maybe we'll get into the crappy part of this conversation for both of us, which is cancer. And maybe why don't you tell us about, your cancer diagnosis and prognosis and battle and how it's gone for you.
Yeah, that was crazy. It still is crazy. I mean, there aren't too many minutes that go by that I don't have a thought about it. And I don't know if we'll get to talk about you here or not, but I do appreciate you reaching out to me prior. or during. But in 2021, I went in for colon. I was literally leaving for a trip like 4 days later, and I was just getting a routine colonoscopy and woke up and had cancer, initially diagnosed at stage 4 because it looked like there was stuff in my lungs and a couple other places. And after about a month of tests and uncertainty, it was stage 3B, which was still crazy colorectal cancer, big tumor. And then, the world just goes away. And yeah, it was hard. But, for me, I wasn't really thinking about expeditions or anything. I was just thinking about the family.
Yeah.
And, initially, I was just like doing the math, like, cause they're like, okay, you got 4 years to live. I'm like, okay, well, my kid will be 12 or 13 when I die. What will they remember? What can I do with this time now? Just, how much will I be deteriorating? I didn't care about any medical clinics or doctors. I was just like, I'm just going to do my stuff as close as I can here, which is a challenge in Crested Butte because I don't want to go anywhere else. And that was really my main thought process and just trying to get through every second. I mean, it was so scary, so overwhelmed. I couldn't talk to anybody. Thankfully, my wife, Maria, I if I would have been alone, I probably would have just died. If it was just me, I couldn't talk to my mom. I couldn't do anything. I was just so overwhelmed and scared. I mean, in a way that I've never been. And I was just bringing it all in. It's just like, can I get through this hour? Can I go to sleep at night? Can I look at my kids? And yeah, it's still, it's 4 years ago now, and it's still a very emotional thing for me. Then it was chemo, radiation, surgery. I had a really bad infection after surgery. I couldn't sit in a chair for like 5 months. I was pretty well on the oxycodone path, which I didn't realize at the time until I tried to stop taking it. And man, it was just a challenge. And then, as part of my surgery, I had an ileostomy bag to heal my colon. I had about 14 inches of my colon removed. And then now my whole insides are different. And it's just been a crazy journey, and one that I never would have expected, but really has informed my life in a lot of really positive ways, which is crazy to say because it was a hellacious experience.
Yeah, and I mean, I think the most basic thing you said that really resonates with me is that idea of you don't worry about yourself so much as you worry about those people you want to care for, right? For your kids, for your wife, friends, the rest of your family. I mean, all of a sudden it puts that in a perspective where that's what matters. That's all you care about, right? I mean,
Yeah. I mean, it's really 100%. I mean, that was, and maybe other people are different, and people experiencing things in different ways. But for me, it was really bringing it all in, and not even about me and my life, because like there's only one direction that we're all going. So it's not like any of us is getting out of it alive. And I had a good run. Like when I was finally able to talk to my mom, maybe about a month and a half after my diagnosis. And I was just like, yeah, I mean, I had this dream of being an explorer or whatever you want to call it. I got to the North Pole, and as a kid from Wisconsin, I would have never imagined that it came through. I found a calmness in my life being a dad that I never expected, and a joy that I never realized. I'm like, what else do I need? So it was hard, and and I would lay in bed in chemo, and I would listen to Marie and the kids eating dinner, and I'd be like, this is what it's like without me here.
yeah,
I'd hear
yeah,
and and that was hard. I spent a lot of time watching the world go by, me and my career kind of going up in smoke, and some of my crazy ideas other people following through on. And I started to think, man, like, what is the point of all this stupid stuff that I've been doing? It's so pointless. And when Hillary O'Neill died, who I knew, and I thought, how arrogant was I to be putting myself in these life-threatening situations? What a privileged, stupid thing to be doing. And so I got really down on this whole adventure thing, um, because I just felt like, man, when death chooses you, it's one thing, this is how I feel alive. This is what I meant to do, and the risk is part of who I am, and blah blah blah. With all the stuff we've been talking about, but then when death chooses you, I wasn't thinking about. I was trying. What are the fewest risks that I can take right now? Like how can I like go in a bubble to the hospital to chemo? And but as I move forward through all that, on this really painful path, physically, mentally, uncertain outcome, it was really all that adventure and all the things I did on expeditions that I would draw upon that really helped me get through in a crazy way that I would have never expected. Even just the chemo, like we divide our day, like on a polar trip, it's like get through the first hour, then the second, then we're at lunch, and then it's this, and then it's the end of the day, and then we get to set the tent. I mean, how many chemo are you still on chemo?
I'm done. I did 6 rounds of chemo. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, and so it's like to think about the last round of chemo on round one
Yeah, you're not there. No.
is it's overwhelming. You can't do it. You can't get through it. You just like go walk off a cliff. And so just like on expeditions, getting through a stupid boring day, it's just like, okay, I got one, I'm doing this one, then I'll get to the next one. After I get that one, then it's, 2 more to the halfway point, but I'm still not thinking about the end. And just the physical discomfort. I spent a lot of time on expeditions and physical discomfort and finding the one little piece of thing that could get me through that, or, killing time when I just, I couldn't carry an empty box across the room. I was so weak. Just all this stuff.
Yeah, and I mean, I think you're, as you said, with the chemo too, much like when you're suffering out there, when you first start it, you're all, I can deal with this. It doesn't affect me at all. And by those last rounds, you're like, I don't want to do this anymore. It sucks. You know what it's going to do to you. You know how bad it makes you feel. And, it's cumulative. So
it was crazy. Yeah. And I had this, one of the drugs that I had, oxaliplantin, gives you a real intolerance to cold in a very crazy, painful way that I was like, oh man, cold? Did you say cold? Like if they're like, I can't do anything, but I can deal with the cold. Like,
right.
That's,
polar
me.
adventure. Yeah.
Yeah. Right here. And I remember I walked into our grocery store after my first chemo session, and I walked through the vegetable section, and my hands, it was like needles in my hands. And it can be permanent. It can be permanent for certain people if you do it long enough, and my face, and there would be times when I would forget and I'd take a drink of cold juice and it would just be like needles down my throat, and I had to have my face covered, and it was just, it had to take my physical, not only did cancer at that moment take away my physical ability, it also took away my identity and any sort of a hope of a future. And so it was really hard for a long time. And, I give a lot of credit to Maria for helping me through, and just a lot of people, as much as I do things on my own and white knuckle. I remember you sent me that picture from when OR moved to Colorado.
The UMC and the big party at the Ogden. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and I was just like, it was just so nice. It was just such a simple gesture.
Oh, good.
And, it was a time when my trajectory was still going up, and it was a very happy moment for me. I know a lot of my friends were there. It was a cool opportunity. And, that was awesome. And you and other people from the outdoor industry, Kristen Hostetter was so kind. I remember she was in Boston. I did a lot of my a lot of my surgeries and stuff out there. She would pick me
Oh,
up or
wow.
meet up with me. Yeah. And, I had spent these 20 years trying to do these things with myself for myself, and as a result, without knowing it, I got this great network of people, and it's pretty
It's
cool.
hard to accept too, right? I know I felt that way. Like people wanted to raise money for you, do things. You're like, no, no, I don't want that.
Oh
You're like, I
yeah,
don't want
yeah,
that. I don't want you to
yeah,
do anything for me. And then eventually you kind of have to give into it. Other people say, well, wouldn't you do that for someone? And then when you do give in, there's something just incredible about how many people are there for you if you've put
yeah.
goodwill in the world.
Yeah, and I'm a self-employed dude, and
Yeah.
so and my work really is not that these are very big, but it's like my muscles are what brings in the
Yeah.
money, and it was right after COVID, so when COVID hit, I was like kind of like great, I don't have to travel for a little while. I've been on a tear doing all sorts of stuff, and I was like, this is great. And then it was after COVID, and it was a big challenge. And so to accept that help from people in both big and small ways was the only way that I got by. And that has informed my life in such a huge way. Since that time, I was like, how did I get by before this? I mean, I wasn't an a-hole or anything, but um, at least I don't think so. Some people might say otherwise, but it's just now my path. I'm still on the same path. I'm figuring it out, but it's just this idea of compassion. And when you were diagnosed, um, I wouldn't say I was there 24/7, and nobody is, but just trying to send a few
Oh, it meant
notes
so
on
much to me.
occasion
Yeah, it
because
meant so much to me to hear from you. And you were one of the first people I reached out to. You and Drew Simmons, other people
yeah,
I knew who had gone through it. It means so much to, and John DeQualo, I reached out to these people to be like, hey, help me here, help me along. You really need it. You need someone else who's gone through it.
yeah, and it doesn't take much,
Yeah.
it just a little message, and so a note, whatever. I'm thinking about you. It doesn't, a lot of people get stuck in like, I don't know what to say. And I get it. I've been there. And what you realize is, this human condition is so fragile and frail. Our grasp on anything is pretty tenuous. And, our ability to lift others up is maybe our greatest legacy overall. And that's the thing has really informed me as I move forward in my life. And yeah, I'm still figuring it out though.
And it's a different, I mean, as you know, you feel mortality in a much different way than on the side of a cliff or on a near death crash or something like that. It's just a different understanding of mortality, I think, when you get the diagnosis.
Yeah, yeah, you have no control.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
The word is just so scary. We all know people that have died from cancer, so that your time is limited in a way that it hasn't been before. Death is choosing you, like I said, in comparison to you choosing the death or the
Yeah.
path, so to speak, where death is an option. And we're so arrogant in that path because we think we're in control. And part of that is good. I mean, that's the purpose of us too. That's where the risk. That's why risk is important, because we get better at that stuff. And so who knows? I don't know where I'm going. Hopelessly lost, but making good time. That's what I say.
Well, and and in the weird way, of course, with any negatives or any hard experience, you do find the gift of it, right? What it gives us and what it teaches us, and that's there too, right? There is a positivity to death choosing you, I guess.
100%. I mean, and that's, I think maybe I messaged you this as well, but as crazy as it sounds, I wouldn't change. I mean, it was 2 years, and even now, my life, I'm not the same person. It was hell, and that's putting it mildly. But as crazy as all that was, I don't think I would change it. I wouldn't change it. But that's also a little bit of who I am. I've purposely gone into unpleasant situations, hoping for the like micro pearl of wisdom in all that crap.
This is not a good way to find that pearl. It's not a good way.
No, it's not. But I've also realized I think there are a lot of people in the world that are smarter than me and learn lessons easier. But for whatever reason, I'm just destined to learn everything the hard way. And this is just another thing to learn and move forward with, and enjoy my time here while I can. And just like an expedition, go up there and see what happens.
I guess not to force the metaphor either, but I think for, when you've been sick and then you look at the planet, places you've been on the planet, and we see that the planet's sick too, right? And in some ways, hopefully, dealing with this disease can help us think about how to deal with the planet, how to find resilience, how to find hope, right? How to move on.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and those are thoughts that are kind of cornerstone to who I am as a person. My background is in environmental education. My dad was the director of a nature center when I was a kid, so I was like a little weird kid that was banning birds and collecting prairie seeds and doing all these things. And I got into expeditions. Not a lot of people know, but not because I thought I was a tough dude, but because I thought adventure was a great way to talk about environmental issues and be outside. And I'm still on that path. I have taken a hard look with our current political climate and just the changing world of, all this advocacy that I've done, kind of what I would kind of negatively now call a little more lip service. I mean, I think we did a lot of great things, and petitions to get polar bears that get listed as endangered species and all these other things. But at the end of the day, I'm a little more pessimistic about my particular efforts. I still take aluminum cans out of garbage when I see it and turn all my lights off in my house and all these other things, which I think individual action are important. But I've had a little bit of I'm still in the midst of it. I think just reflection on what does environmental advocacy look like moving forward, to make an impact. And I don't have any answers. I think a social media post about something doesn't hurt, but I don't know if it really is moving the needle at all. And what I keep coming back to is the outdoors and being outside and being close to nature, and in whatever shape or form that is, whether it's an expedition, whether it's playing in a park, bird watching, hunting, fishing, and anything in between, playing soccer. I don't know. I think all these things are important parts of us being connected to our planet as we simultaneously become disconnected to our planet. And so I don't know what my path is in terms of my environmental advocacy, but I know it's kind of more focused on that idea of being outdoors for everyone.
I like that. Yeah, it seems the only answer, right? Because we have to all understand the power of it and need that power in our lives, I think, to then want to advocate for it.
Yeah, and understand that even if we don't go there, it's still important to the health of our planet. These wilderness areas, these large, vast, untracked sections of wilderness, the Arctic and Antarctic ice caps, Greenland ice sheet, all these places. And then, also just for our own personal mental health, our own physical health, like all these things. And so, I'm not totally sure how to talk about that in a more succinct soundbite way that makes people jump up and do something. But like most of my things, I look at it as a continual effort and a process of kind of honing in on where that lands and trying to do my little part in the best way that I can.
I think, we've talked about cancer, we've talked about the collapse of the planet and all that. And I don't know, we can't end on that, but what we can end on is the question that I ask everyone at the end of the show, which is simply, what gives you hope in the midst of all of this, we've just been talking about?
Yeah, what gives me hope? I mean, people have been, man, that is such a good question. Yeah, not the fleeting nature of time, I can tell you that much. I mean, it is going fast. Oh, man. I wanna slow that clock down. I think, what gives me hope is just I mean, first of all, I'm an optimist, so I'm always hopeful. I have an optimistic view of humanity too, and I think we will find a way that's hopefully a good path and that's sustainable. I think we have the ability to do those things at some point. And then I look around and I'm just so inspired by so many people out there right now doing interesting things, taking a cool photograph. As much as I hate to admit it, doing a very creative Instagram post. Some of them are, I mean, there's some really creative
Yeah,
people
yeah.
out there. My kids finding joy in doing things, their friends. There's not too many days go by when I don't see somebody doing a cool adventure. I'm like, oh, I wish I would do that. Looking at a map of the planet, space travel. I'm optimistic about that too. Science. I love science. I think there's a lot of solutions in science. So there's a lot of things that give me hope. And so I like to focus on those because there is a lot of stuff that's kind of stressing me out too. But I also, I see that other stuff. And I think that's what keeps you going is that kind of movement towards that positivity.
That's beautiful. Well, thank you so much. Thank you for being on the show on a deeper level. Thank you for sharing your story. Thank you for being there to support me when I've been going through cancer. And thank you for being a beacon of optimism for so many people out there.
Said by nobody ever. Yeah, no problem. Thank you, Doug. I
Yeah.
appreciate the opportunity to be here, and it was great to talk with you.
Can't wait for the chance we can talk again. And if anyone does want to, join you as a guide or an expedition, how can they find out what you're doing and how they might be able to learn from you?
Well, you can go to my website that what hasn't been updated since 1945, and that is www.ericlarsenexplorer.com. Just Google my name.
Amazing. Thanks so much, Eric. Really good to talk to you.
Thank you.
Thanks for imbibing Open Container, a production of Rockfight LLC. Please take a second to follow our show on whatever podcast app you're listening to us on and send your emails and feedback to myrockfight@gmail.com. Learn more about Eric Larsen at ericlarsenexplorer.com. Our producers today were David Karstad and Colin True. Art direction provided by Sarah Gensert. I'm Doug Schnitzbahn. Get some. Thanks for listening.